No one can remember it?
I can't say it. We know it, but like we need someone to say it. Same.
Somebody else to say it first. Oh.
It's because we have it in our heads, we just need to refresh it.
Oh, if I give you the first word, will that help?
Yeah.
Put.
Put on therefore the elect of God, holy and beloved, bowels of mercy, kindness, humbleness of mind, meekness, long suffering. Colossians chapter 3 verse 12.
Excellent. Very good. Okay. Anybody else can remember it? Lucas.
Put on therefore the elect of God, bowels of mercies, kindness, humbleness of mind, meekness, long suffering. Colossians chapter 3 verse 12.
Very good. Isaiah.
Put on therefore as the elect of God, holy and beloved, bowels of mercies, kindness, humbleness of mind, meekness, long suffering. Colossians chapter 3 verse 12.
Good. Savannah, do you know this one? This one's a long one with lots of long words in it, huh? Okay, and Aiden, not this one. Maybe next week, right? Okay. Very good. Okay. Who knows what we've been talking about the last few weeks?
Forgiveness.
Forgiveness. And what is forgiveness? Savannah? You want to?
Forgive somebody and love them.
You love them as if they never did it? Good.
Forget of something that and not bring it back again.
Very good. You forget it and don't bring it up again. Do they owe you anything?
No. Yes.
Not if you've forgiven them.
An apology before you have an apology.
Yeah, but should we forgive even if they don't apologize? Did Jesus forgive
Yeah.
the people on the cross? He said, Father, forgive them. Had those guys said, I'm sorry?
No.
No. So even if people don't apologize, for our own sake, we need to forgive. That's not always easy to forgive, is it? Now, let's see, we have New Testaments over here, I think. I need somebody to look up Matthew chapter 6 and verse 12. You want to look that up? How about Luke chapter 6, verse 31? And then this one will be at the very end, but the Colossians, the chapter 3, verse 12, we memorized, but also verse 13. Now, Lucas, can you read Matthew chapter 6 and verse 12?
And forgive us our debts as we forgive our debtors.
Oh, very good. So we're to forgive our debtors because we want what? God to forgive us, don't we? When somebody does something to harm us, or they say something to us or about us that makes us angry or hurts our feelings, what is the first thing that we usually want to do?
Forgive us to be forgiven.
That's what we should do, but is that always the first thing? Almost never, right? What's our first thought usually?
For what?
When somebody says something nasty to you or about you, or they do something not nice to you.
Give it back.
To give it back? Say something back? Punch them, maybe? No. We want them to pay, don't we? How dare they do that to us? That is usually our attitude. Very rarely, if ever, do we think first, I need to forgive that person. Because why? We have a sinful heart too, don't we? And anger is in our sinful heart. And anger says, who are they? I don't deserve that. Therefore, I should get back at them. Anger and forgiveness don't reside in the same heart, do they? Can you have anger and forgiveness in your heart at the same time?
No.
You really can't, can you? Some people with their mouth say, I forgive, but in their heart, they don't forget. We call that holding a grudge, don't we? When we hold a grudge, what happens in our heart? Are we really forgiven? Because why? When we hold a grudge, what are we planning or hoping for, usually?
Say it after a long time.
When we hold a grudge, we don't truly forgive them, we just say with our mouth, but in our heart we're still angry on the inside. We usually are thinking of how later we can get back at them, or later we can see them be hurt in some way. Later they will pay. So is it good for us to hold a grudge?
No.
Is it good for us to stay angry? No. It doesn't do good things in us. In fact, it hurts us more. Did you know that sometimes people are not even aware that they've done something that made you angry? Because they didn't mean it to be something bad against you, but you took it that way. And so they walk away, they're not bothered at all, but you are the one that's bothered in your heart. Who is going to suffer because of that resentment and unforgiveness in your heart? That other person? They don't even know, do they? But we will suffer. And did you know that doctors have found through studies that many sicknesses can be related back to people being bitter, in other words, they didn't forgive, or staying angry. So even for our physical health, it's not good for us to stay angry, to be unforgiving. But why is it most important that we forgive?
So that God can forgive us.
That's right. Because the verse that you just read, we ask God to forgive us. And how are we to ask God to forgive us? As we forgive others. How do you forgive other people? Just think about that for a minute. Are you good at forgiving other people? You don't have to answer that question. I just want you to think about that. How good am I at forgiving? Because guess what? That's how much God is going to forgive you. Can God forgive everything? Absolutely. But He forgives us as we forgive others. Now, when we forgive someone, as the verse you read says, forgive us our debts as we forgive our debtors. That means that we cancel the debt. To cancel something means that it no longer exists. And when somebody hurts us with actions or with words, and we don't forgive, we're actually hanging on to that and saying, they owe me. They should pay. But forgiveness cancels that debt. And so they are no longer owing you something. They are no longer deserving of a penalty or pain. That's hard, isn't it? If they cause us pain, we want them to suffer oftentimes, don't we? And how do we know that we've forgiven them? Because we said the words? Does that prove that we've forgiven somebody just because we say, I forgive you? No, what if we say, okay, I forgive you, and then 2 days later, do you remember when you did? Have I forgiven them? Because I brought it back up again. But is it easy to do that? Especially if they did it or said it again. Yeah, and you said it or you did that 2 days ago, 3 weeks ago. That's okay. If you just go in there, you'll go through the back. Okay, perfect. It pulls. Perfect, okay. Okay.
What if she goes to the left or the right?
I think she'll figure it out pretty quick. She could be outside, obviously not where she wants to be. All right. If we say, I forgive, it doesn't prove that we've forgiven, does it? Our actions and how we treat that person proves that we've actually forgiven them. That's why part of forgiving is to treat that person with love. Luke chapter 6 and verse 31.
And as ye would that men should do to you, do ye also to them likewise.
Okay, so Jesus is saying, however you want people to treat you, that's how you're supposed to treat them. How do we want people to treat us?
Okay.
We want them to treat us good, don't we? Kindly. We want them to be thoughtful. Do we want them to share? Yeah, and if we do something wrong, how do we want them to act towards us? Do we want them to forgive? Yeah, we don't like it when people hold grudges against us and want to get even with us, do we? So if we want people to treat us kindly, we want people to share with us, we want people to forgive us, what must we do first? Forgive them, treat them kindly, share with them, be nice to them, be good to them. It doesn't say wait to see how the other person treats you and then you treat them that same way. Is that what Jesus said? He said, however you, what you're thinking, want other people to treat you, that's what you need to do first. That's how you need to treat them. So, we want other people to forgive us, so we first need to forgive others. Now, how soon should we forgive someone? Tomorrow? Next week?
Straight away.
Straight away, that's right. Remember the verse, I think we looked at it a couple weeks ago, in Ephesians, it says, let not the sun go down upon your wrath. So in other words, don't let the day end and still have anger in your heart, still have unforgiveness in your heart. We're supposed to take care of it right away. Is there any benefit, any good that comes to you by hanging on to that anger just a little bit longer?
No.
Does it make you happy? No, it doesn't. And so it's really better just to get to forgive right away. Are there any things that are hard to forgive? What's really hard to forgive someone for? Do you have an...
When someone eats the last piece of the cake.
Oh, and you were really hoping to have it, right? That's hard to forgive. Okay, what are some other things?
If someone breaks something you like.
Yes, sometimes that happens with brothers and sisters especially, doesn't it? Well, sometimes once in a while it even could be an accident with mom or dad too, I know. When somebody breaks something that you like, can you think of anything else? Ivana?
Something they stole from you that is something really precious to you.
Yeah, that's hard to forgive, isn't it? What if somebody embarrasses you? Is that easy or hard to forgive? That's hard to forgive. And the more people it happened in front of, the harder it is to forgive, isn't it? So there are some things that we really struggle with to forgive. But is there anything that is too big for God to forgive? God forgave Paul, didn't he? Paul was a murderer, and he got saved. God forgave him, and he became a great missionary or pastor. So God forgave him, and God used him. God forgave thieves. Remember the two men on the cross on either side of him? What were they? Thieves, and possibly even murderers. One of them said, Lord, I believe, and Jesus forgave him. Could he have forgiven the other one?
Yeah.
Did he?
Yeah.
No, he didn't forgive the other one. Why?
Oh, he didn't believe.
He didn't believe. In fact, he kept mocking and making fun of Jesus. Now, Jesus didn't hate him, but Jesus only saves us when we admit we need to be saved and ask Jesus to forgive us and to save us from our sins. So Jesus, God, can forgive anyone no matter what they've done. So what does that mean for us?
That we need to forgive others to be forgiven.
That we need to forgive others whatever they do, right? If we want to be forgiven of whatever we do, we need to forgive them. of anything that they've done, especially when they apologize. If God can forgive them, who are we to not forgive them? Can God forgive them for what they did to us?
Yes.
Are we better than God?
No.
Definitely not. And so we definitely should forgive. If God can forgive them, we should forgive them. Sometimes we aren't sure what to do. Whenever we're not sure what to do, we can ask one question: what would Jesus do? And when we know that answer, we know what we should do. In this particular thing, somebody's done something wrong to us, and we ask that question, what would Jesus do? What's the answer? Jesus would forgive them. So we know what we should do. Sometimes, all the time, or never? All the time. Jesus forgives all the time. Everything, doesn't he? When we don't forgive, does that affect us?
Yes.
What does it do? How does it affect us? What does it do to us when we don't forgive someone?
It gives us anger.
It gives us anger. How about attitude? Does it affect our attitude? Which anger would affect attitude, right? How does it affect our attitude? What kind of attitude do we have? Grumpy, definitely. Are we a little bit cross with nearly everybody? We can be, can't we? There's that one person, we're angry with them, we keep hold of that, we don't forgive, but how do we treat everybody else around us? Not like we should, huh? When we're angry, we often treat most, if not everyone around us, not in the best way. So our unforgiving attitude doesn't affect just me and that person. It affects anybody who's around us, doesn't it? Do you like to be around people who are grumpy?
No.
Why not?
So they make us grow.
We like to be around happy people because we like to be happy, don't we? And so we can actually affect other people's attitudes because we're having a problem. Do we often need to ask God to forgive us after we've forgiven somebody?
Yes.
They might be the one that made fun of me in front of the whole class, but what was my first reaction? Was it anger? Was it some other kind of reaction that Jesus would not have had? And I need to ask God to forgive me for that, even though they're the one who did something wrong first, shall we say. We're still responsible for how we respond, how we react to what other people do to us. That is something to keep in mind, isn't it? Is Jesus asking us to be perfect? He knows we can't be perfect, but he says, "Be ye holy as I am holy." So Jesus does want us to be growing in acting like him. And he forgives us when we sin, doesn't he? Especially when we ask him to forgive us. Well, I'm going to tell you a story about forgiveness. Do these guys look happy? No, this younger man is talking to this older man who's a doctor. Now, he's not sick. He just happens to know this guy, and he respects him. He's a wise older man. And at the end of what he was telling him, he said, "I will forgive, but I will never forget." Did he really forgive?
No.
But this older, wiser man, he knows that. He can't say, "You didn't forgive." He knows that this young man just won't even listen to him. So he says, that is a response that many people have. But it's not the right response. God forgives us, and God expects us to forgive others, because whatever we have done against God is bigger or more times than what someone has done against us. Young man, do you think he wanted to hear that?
No.
No. The thing that the person had done against him was he thought the worst thing ever. He said, well, there's just some things you can't forget about because they affect the rest of your life. They make it dark, like dark clouds coming over the sky. And the older man said, if that's your attitude, it will cause a dark sky in your life. But if you forgive, it'll be like the sunshine coming out again. Oh, that's not what this young man wanted to hear. He wanted the old man to agree with him, that he had the right to be angry and resentful against that other person. He said, well, let me put it to you this way. There are some things you just cannot forgive. They are just too big. Do you think the older man still agreed with him now? No, he said, you know, I still have to disagree. That's not true. There is nothing too big for God to forgive, and you appreciate that, and you're happy about that. And if there's nothing too big for God to forgive, there's nothing too big for us to forgive. Oh, the young man did not look happy. He still looked angry. And so the older man said, let me tell you how I learned about forgiveness. He said, when I was a younger man, after I had finished going to university and becoming a doctor, I was looking for a place to set up my own doctor's office. Well, in the next little village over from my village, the doctor there was old and he died suddenly of a heart attack. And his son was supposed to eventually become the doctor next in that town, but he had decided that he was going to travel Europe for a year and there were still 6 months left. So they needed a doctor for 6 months, didn't they? And so they asked me to come over and be the doctor for those 6 months. And I thought, well, this will be great because I'll actually get to be a doctor and take care of people, and maybe that'll help me get my next job. So I went, and when I went there, on the hill above the village was a windmill where people would bring their wheat and it would be ground into flour. And the man who owned this windmill was considered rich. Not just because he owned the windmill. He owned the windmill and he owned several of the cottages in the village below. But most people did not like him. Do you think they just didn't like him because he was rich? No. He was not a nice person. Because he was rich, did he need to be nice to those people? That's what he didn't think so. So he treated them however he felt like treating them. And so he did not have a reputation for being a nice person. And when I met him a little while later after being there, I had to agree with the people that had been telling me about him. He's not really a very nice person. Well, several years before I actually came there, the doctor was telling this young man, another man moved to this village. And he had a daughter, and she could sew very well. She still lived with him. Their mother had died, and she would help add money to the family by fixing people's clothes, sewing new clothes. And this was before they had sewing machines. That was a long time ago. So it all had to be done by hand. But the father was looking for a job, and he got a job at the windmill, working for the miller. And he did a good job. No one ever complained about his work. He kept to himself. He was a pretty quiet person, and so nobody really knew what his opinions were about different things. He was just a peaceful, kind person. He's a little bit different from the miller, isn't he? Well, at that time, politically, there were some people that were trying to stir up trouble. And one of those kind of people came and stayed at the inn in their village. And he stayed just for about a week, but every day he was going around and trying to talk to as many people as he could to make them discontent with the things that they had and to make them angry at people that had more money or a bigger house. Is that a good way to be? The Bible tells us that we are to be content with such things as we have, because who gave them to us? God. And if we're not content, we're actually saying, God, You don't know what you're doing. You didn't give me what I want, and so I don't like you. That's not a good attitude to have, is it? Discontent is not good. Well, the miller, he liked being popular, and he saw this as an opportunity to be part of the election and maybe become a politician himself. So he started a club, and he would get the people together every night at the inn, and they would talk about the people who had authority and how terrible they were, and talk about rich people. He wasn't thinking too clearly, was he? Because all the people in the village thought that he was rich, right? But he didn't see himself as rich. He saw other people who had more money and more power. So he would talk to the people in the village, and he would try to get them all stirred up and all angry. Well, this man who had come to work for the miller, who was a kind man, his name is Job Smith. And he didn't come to those meetings except for one night. It was raining out, and he happened to step inside the inn to get out of the rain. And so he was there for that meeting, and he heard what they were saying. And he was perplexed. In other words, he was confused. He was surprised that they were talking like this. And he had that look on his face like, I just don't understand why they're saying these things. And so the miller, he pointed back to him and said, you agree with me, right, Mr. Smith? What do you think Mr. Smith said?
Yeah.
No, he didn't agree. He said, sir, I believe that what I have comes from the Lord, and I am content with the things that I have. And even if I wasn't, I would still be a law-abiding citizen. I'm not for stirring up rebellion and fighting against those in authority. Don't believe that's what God would have me do. Do you think the miller said, oh man, you're right? No. He was a proud person, and whatever he thought everybody else should think, and everybody should agree with him. And so he got angry, and he kept pressing Mr. Job Smith, and he kept getting closer to him. And no matter what he said to Mr. Smith said, no, I can't agree with you. And so finally the miller just hauled off and punched him. The other people knew that the miller could have a wicked temper. Do you think it was going to stop there with one punch?
No.
And they weren't sure what Mr. Smith would do. He had never hit anybody yet, but maybe he could. He was a strong man. So they tried to separate him, and they got Mr. Smith to go outside, and somebody walked with him to get him home. Well, the next day, he came to work. Do you think the miller had forgotten all about it?
No.
No, he hadn't. He saw Job Smith come in, and he said, you're fired. Had Job done anything to be fired? No, he was a good worker. He kept himself to himself. He was always kind to other people. And he said, on top of that, that cottage that you live in belongs to me. You have to be moved out in a week. Was there anywhere else for him to live? Probably not. So he was going to have to go to another village to find a job in another place. And he thought, I better do it right away. I only have 1 week. I have to move myself and my daughter out. I better find a job right away. So even though the weather was cold, he said, I better go. So he walked. And he got to the next place. The next place was a small village. They didn't even have an inn, so he wasn't sure where he could sleep. So he slept outside, and it rained. If you sleep outside and it's raining and it's cold, what happens to you?
Yeah, hypothermia.
Well, he didn't get hypothermia exactly that killed him, but he got sick. He got chilled to the bone, and he started walking to the next village after that. And they had a place that was not a nice place called a workhouse. If they found someone who was poor and destitute, we would say today homeless, they would take that person to the workhouse. And they took him there, and in a couple of days he became so sick that he died. Well, the miller felt maybe just a little bit bad. And so he gave the daughter a little bit more time to find a new place to live. Well, she went around looking for a job, and she went to a farmer, and she applied to be what they call a dairy maid. Someone who would milk the cows, take care of the milk, make butter for the farmer, help the farmer sell the milk, help the farmer sell the butter. And he said, "Whose daughter are you?" "Job Smith." "No job for you. You can't give me a good character reference." And the girl was surprised because she'd never been in trouble anywhere. She'd never even been in a fight with anyone, even a big argument with anyone. How could he say that? Well, she found out later that the farmer had been talking to the miller, and the miller had nothing good to say about her father, but because he had nothing good to say about her father, he started talking bad about her. Did she deserve that? Did she deserve for her father to be dead? To be fired? No. Oh, when she found out, she got angry. And she thought, "I curse the miller. It's his fault that my father is dead." Is she right? She's right that it's probably her father's fault, but should she curse him? No, she shouldn't. And you know, her father read the Bible to her, and she knew that what she was doing was how she felt was wrong. And she thought, you know, I just can't feel sorry for myself. God, forgive me. Help me find something. And so she found a little tiny room in one of the cottages with the neighbors, and they would let her stay there for some money. She would give them money. Well, the only way she could earn money was by sewing. And that didn't make a lot of money. So now she was poor. She lived in a dark, dingy place. Well, the doctor told him, you know, when I moved there, shortly after I moved there, Mr. Smith had just passed away. And this fever came. And it was not a nice fever. It put people down in bed. They got very, very sick, and almost every single cottage in that village and in the next village where there was no doctor, at least one person in the house got it. And then it was really bad if children got it. Not all of the children, but many of the children died when they got this fever. And he said, I went to the miller's house because the miller called for me, and his daughter had the fever. And so I would come and I would try to take care of her, but I had so many other people to take care of. And then the next thing I knew, the daughter still had it, and the wife was also sick with the fever. And the miller called for him and wanted him to stay there all the time, just taking care of his wife and his daughter. Is that fair? You can understand why he would want that, but it's not fair. There were so many other sick people. He said, I can't. I have all these other people to take care of. Well, the servant girl who worked for the miller, she said, that's it, I'm leaving too. I don't want to get this. I don't want to die. And she left, and her family lived a little ways away. So she thought, if I go home, I won't get sick. Who's going to now take care of the wife and the daughter? The man has to, the miller, but he has his work to do. And the doctor said, I would ask somebody, but I don't know who to ask. There's sick people in every house, and they're taking care of their own families. I don't know who to ask. I hope you find someone. I hope your wife and your daughter get better. I'll be back as soon as I can, but it might be a day, it might be 2 days. And sure enough, it was 2 days later, and the daughter should have been so sick that maybe she would die. But when he got to the house, do you know what he saw? He saw someone, no, this is not the girl, but she was acting like a nurse. She had the mother in a bed, and she had the daughter in a bed, and she was doing everything she could to take care of the mother and the daughter of the miller. And he thought, who would do that? This man has never been kind to anybody. Who would come here? And so I had to ask this woman, who are you? What is your name? Do you guys know who she was?
Yes.
Who?
The girl that lives in that small house and did suit.
Yeah, Job Smith's daughter. And he was amazed. He said, I didn't know what to say at that point, but she stayed there. And I was worried for her because she's taking care of sick people. I thought for sure she would get that fever. But you know, the whole time that she stayed there, She stayed there till they started getting better, and then she stayed until they were strong enough to be healthy. Not just not sick, but healthy. I was worried for her that whole time. And finally, at the end of that, I said, I just have to ask you, why? When he did the terrible things he did to your father, why would you come here and risk your life to help him, help his daughter and his wife? And she said, oh, sir, at first I was so angry, I cursed him. But I remembered the Bible verses that my father had read to me, and I knew that that wasn't right. I knew I had to forgive him. As Jesus forgave me, I needed to forgive other people, even someone who caused the death of my father. And so I prayed and I asked God for strength to forgive and to prove my forgiveness. Do you think that her going there and helping prove that she truly forgave?
Yes.
Yeah. And so the doctor, remember, he's talking to the younger man, and he said, that's when I learned what true forgiveness is. He said, that girl, nobody would have thought she was a bad person if she would have just let the miller's wife and daughter alone, and maybe they would die. Nobody would think anything bad about her. But she did what was needed to be done, no matter who it was, because she had truly forgiven. She didn't let what the other person had done stop her from doing what was right. You think the young man is thinking differently now?
Yes.
Yeah. You know, he said, you're right. What that person did to me isn't anything near what that miller did to that girl's father. And if she could forgive, and if Jesus can forgive me, then by God's help, I can forgive the person who has wronged me. I'm glad he learned his lesson, aren't you? Do we ever face anything that is difficult to forgive?
Yeah.
Maybe not somebody killing our father or causing his death, but there's hard things that we face that people have done to us. You think we can forgive them? We should forgive them, shouldn't we? And who will help us when it's really hard if we ask him? God, that's right. And you know, I think it's a good thing to ask God to help us to forgive, because in our own strength, it's really difficult. But with God's help, we can do the right thing. All right, you have the verses, Colossians chapter 3, verse 12 and 13.
Did I read 12 and 13?
Oh, he does, sorry. You're right.
Did I read 12 and then 13?
Mm-hmm.
Put on therefore as the elect of God, holy and beloved, bowels of mercies, kindness, humbleness of mind, meekness, long-suffering, forbearing one another and forgiving one another. If any man have a quarrel against any, even as Christ forgave you, so also do ye.
So I have actually verse 13 for you guys to, that's our next memory verse. One of the two of you. Okay.
Pretty short.
Huh?
Pretty short.
Pretty short, not too hard.
It is short.
Verse 12 is a little longer than verse 13. So this week, the verses continue. We're to forbear one another. It's sort of like being patient. Forbearing is, let me think. If somebody does something, it's not sin, it's not wrong, it just irritates you. Like maybe your brother or your sister has a bad habit of going, something like that, and it just drives you crazy, okay? But if you're forbearing, you're not going to get angry with them for doing it. You think that's easy? No. I had a brother who made strange noises. Sometimes I think he did it just to make me irritated. And I was not always forbearing. Sometimes I would let them know I was unhappy. That wasn't right. I should have been forbearing. I should have just let it go, even though it was irritating to me. But then the next thing says, and forgiving one another. And then it also goes on to clarify that if any man have a quarrel against any, so in other words, it means if any of us has something against any other person, we're to forgive them. There's no exceptions. And how are we to forgive? Even as Christ forgave you, so also do ye. How did Jesus forgive? How does Jesus forgive? He forgives every time, no matter how many times, doesn't he? He forgives completely, and he forgets. He never brings it up again. That's how we're supposed to forgive other people. Okay, let's read this together a few times. Forbearing one another and forgiving one another. If any man have a quarrel against any, even as Christ also forgave you. Oops. I put in the next word, didn't I? Even as Christ forgave you, so also do ye. Sorry about that. I put in the next word. Colossians chapter 3, verse 13. Let's do that again. Forbearing one another and forgiving one another. If any man have a quarrel against any, even as Christ forgave you, so also do ye. Colossians chapter 3, verse 13. One more time. Forbearing one another and forgiving one another. If any man have a quarrel against any, even as Christ forgave you, so also do ye. Colossians chapter 3, verse 13. Okay. Aiden?
Forbearing one another and forgiving one another. If any man has a quarrel against any, even as Christ forgave you, so also do ye. Colossians chapter 3, verse 13.
Very good. And we'll just go down the line.
Okay. Forbearing one another and forgiving one another. If any man have a quarrel against any, even as Christ forgave you, so also do ye. Colossians chapter 2, verse 17.
And forbearing one another and forgiving one another, as if any man have a quarrel against any, even as Christ forgave you, so also do ye. Colossians chapter 3, verse 12.
Forbearing one another and forgiving one another. If any man have a quarrel against any, even as Christ forgave you, so also do ye. Colossians chapter 3, verse 12.
Forbear one another and forgive one another. If any man have a quarrel against any, even as Christ forgave you, so also do ye. Colossians chapter 3, verse 13.
Very good. Okay. Well, we don't have to wonder if they're done yet today, do we?
Yeah.
Okay, so let's say goodbye to the people online.
Bye.
Bye-bye. We'll see you next week.
I can save to anyone.